We've got JT, John Thomas, online with us, and Marco is on his way to Istanbul, I believe. That's the news. But he's part of the presentation that all three of them created for this product announcement and launch. Just a couple comments about the user interface you have here. It's the GoToWebinar software. You can put questions into the question area of the dashboard, and people have been doing that to say hi and asking questions. We'll handle questions along the way, and we'll also recap and handle questions at the end. So it's great having you all. We're capturing all of this, so there'll be a replay in the next couple weeks. We're doing this 3 times today at 6 a.m., 11 a.m., and 5 p.m. So it's great, again, to have you all here, and let's get started.
Hello, and welcome to the Delphi XE5 product announcement. Most of you were probably expecting a tech preview today, but I'm happy to share with you that we're now shipping Delphi XE5. So we'll spend the next hour or so talking about some of the details in this release. I'm JT, Director of Product Management, and I'm joined by both Marco and Serena today to help us walk through some of these new features and some demos. So let's start by taking a look at this new world we live in, a world of multiple devices everywhere. So this is a graphic I really like to use because it helps demonstrate visually the change that is going on with regard to the availability of different client platforms now. Many years ago, there were plenty of choices for personal computing. But around 1983, Windows and Intel in particular started taking over the market. And for basically the last 20 years, it was a 95+% Wintel world. But over the last few years, things have changed dramatically. With the release of the Apple iPhone and the rise of Android devices, more than 50% are using Apple or Android devices. Now, of course, Windows and Intel devices are still very important, still very widely used, but this is a very split world now. Another interesting thing to look at is form factors, and in particular, notebooks have ruled the industry for many years. Analysts have been trying to figure out when exactly tablets were going to surpass the use of notebooks. Turns out it's going to be this year. Not only that, smartphones are everywhere. Over 1.5 billion handsets are going to be shipped by 2016. That's almost 80% of all handset shipments will be smartphones. And what's interesting here is the mix of operating systems that you see as well, primarily Android-based devices and iOS and Windows devices. But it doesn't just stop with handsets and tablets. This client diversity will continue to expand into new areas like wearable computing, in-home automation, automotive infotainment, and really who knows what else. But what's most interesting about this new scenario is that these devices are now app ready. Most of them are going to be based on Android and therefore be able to host your app. So given this situation, we worked with a company called Dimensional Research to ask Windows developers how they viewed this world of mobile. This was a worldwide study of over 1,000 individuals, all with requirements to support Windows applications today. So first of all, we asked them which mobile platforms are most important. And I think it's no surprise that Android and iOS are 2 of the most important platforms that need to be supported. In fact, it's hard to make a choice between Android or iOS today. Windows developers are finding out they have to support both. At the same time, they're telling us we can't forget about Windows. We are still required to develop and support Windows applications. So this is really a world of 3 different operating systems that need to be supported for the near future. Additionally, we asked these Windows developers how they felt about the use of scripted or interpreted language solutions, primarily those based on HTML5 or JavaScript, for example. And even though many of them have said that they are proficient in the use of HTML5 and JavaScript, the vast majority of them understand that the best way to deliver a better user experience and performance is with a natively compiled app. And finally, an overwhelming majority of these developers understand the business benefit of being able to manage a single source code base across all their mobile platforms and desktop platforms. So that leads us into RAD Studio XE5, and I'm very pleased to announce the immediate availability of RAD Studio XE5, Delphi XE5, and C++ Builder XE5. The thing is, mobile is changing everything. But as developers, so are you. And you can use RAD Studio to create that next great mobile app for both Android and iOS, and Windows and OS X. So as we've been talking about for a while, our strategy and focus has been around multi-device app development. The ability for you to use one team and one source code base written in Delphi or C++, targeting the FM application platform. And when we first released this, we focused on supporting not only Windows, but also OS X. And in April, you saw the release of our first ARM toolchain and support for Apple iOS. And in RAD Studio XE5, we're pleased to announce the availability of Android support. And multi-device app development is really about the power of one. One team, one schedule, one effort to deliver your applications across all these major platforms. And not just today, but in the future as well. As devices begin to expand, your ability as a developer to deliver your apps to meet this demand. So when we talk about the true native part of multi-device true native, what we're really talking about is compiling your application down to an ARM binary that runs directly on the device. So our languages, Delphi, C++, for example, are true native languages. Another example is Objective-C that's used by Apple and Xcode. And this is in comparison to other solutions, those based on, for instance, JavaScript, like Accelerator and Kendo, for example, or those based on virtual machines, like Xamarin and Android Dalvik. In these other non-true native approaches, there's always a piece of software between your code and the actual machine. So when we talk about true native, we're talking about it, again, the ability to build a binary that runs directly on the CPU. More specifically, the way we do this for mobile is we take your app sources, you target the FM application platform, and we target, for instance, on iOS, the Cocoa SDK. And we build a .app that lives in an IPA package for you. On the Android side, we're using the native developer kit. And we're generating a shared object that lives in an APK, which is the Android package format. So in Android, once Android launches your application and calls into your shared object, your code is running directly on that ARM CPU. In addition, RAD Studio XE5 really presents the fastest way to build apps for Android and iOS and Windows and OS X. And not just all of them together, but each of them individually. Bringing the RAD way to development for mobile is really something exciting. This is supported by modern language features like the PME support and now automatic reference counting. but also other modern language features such as interfaces and generics, anonymous methods. And of course, both of these languages are supported with very rich RTTI. That allows us to deliver an application platform with a very rich hierarchy of available functionality. And it also allows you to target just one API set across all these devices. Finally, we'd like to talk a little bit about the multi-device application platform. The fact is, a useful mobile app is not an island. It needs to be able to connect to your enterprise data or other services available out there in the internet in the cloud. And so using features like Data Snap, this is a great way for you to be able to take your enterprise data that talks to a SQL server on your back end and expose that data all the way through many tiers onto your client device. Additionally, in RAD Studio XE5, we've delivered some new support for REST. So you're able to work with any RESTful API, whether it's a cloud service or a mobile backend as a service, for example, to integrate these services into your application or into a Data Snap tier, for example. So the multi-device application platform really represents the end-to-end feature support of the FM application platform. So a little bit about the development workflow. For iOS and Mac OS X, you work inside your Windows environment. You connect to some Mac hardware. This Mac hardware can be a physical device available to you on your network. And you can also use a cloud service like the Mac and Cloud service. And the binary is built for you and cross-compiled within the Windows IDE. That binary is then shipped over to the Mac hardware to be packaged and signed, and then deployed to the device or the simulator. On the Android side, the development workflow is all within Windows. So you work within your Windows IDE, you target the emulator or your device, and you deploy your application directly from Windows. So let's take a quick moment to see what this looks like in action. Okay, so let's load up RAD Studio XE5. So the first thing you're going to notice is a new Getting Started page for Android. Now you have two choices when you install Android. You can have the SDK and NDK provided and installed for you, or you can point to your own version of your installed SDK or NDK. We also continue to have the iOS Getting Started guide with information on how to set up your Mac or how to set up your free Mac and Cloud trial. So in each of these, we also share a bunch of code snippets and code examples. So for this demonstration, I'm just going to go ahead and pick one of these code samples. We'll go ahead and pick the location demo. And since we're going to target my S4, let's go ahead and select that as the device. Now you'll see over here that in addition to my iOS device and simulator targets, I now have an Android device target as well. Now the target here by default includes an emulator that we set up for you, but as soon as I plug in my device into USB, it'll pop up right there in the target list. So I'm going to select that, and we're going to build and deploy to that device. Now that we're deployed on the device, we're going to use an application written in FireMonkey to take a look at the device. So here's the location demo running. I'm going to go ahead and turn on the sensor on the device. And this is going to go ahead and get that information from my location service. And in addition, it's going to use a web browser component to show you my location. And you may notice that I am not in Scotts Valley. I'm actually in Maidenhead, the UK office of Embarcadero today. So that's an example of this application running on Android. So now we'll take that exact same source code and target my iOS device. So now we have the app running on my iOS device. I'll go ahead and turn the location sensor on. And it too shows you that I'm here in the UK today.
Thanks, JT. My name is Serena DuPont, and I'm the product manager for Rat Studio. And I'm really excited to share with you today some of the new features in Rat Studio XE5. As part of my presentation, I'm going to be going over the Android styles, mobile components, and also our Android sensor and services support. At the end of the presentation, I will also be showing you some demos, followed by a presentation and demos from Marco. Now let's talk about some of the requirements for building iOS and Android applications. Now, for developing iOS applications, you will need to have Mac hardware running Mac OS X, either Lion or Mountain Lion. If you don't have Mac hardware, you can of course also use a service such as Mac and Cloud, and you will see a link to Mac and Cloud right from within the Start Here page so that you can get set up building iOS applications right away. And we support building applications for iOS 6.x, so that's any version of iOS 6.0 or later. For Android, we support developing applications for Gingerbread, and that is 2.33 through 2.37. Ice Cream Sandwich, that is 4.03 and 4.04. And Jelly Bean, which is 4.1x, 4.2x, and 4.3.x. Now inside Rat Studio, you will find a mobile application wizard, and the mobile application wizard can be invoked by going to File, New Mobile Application, and it provides you various options to get you started quickly. You can choose from a blank HD or 3D application, as well as header footer application templates, tabbed application templates, and also a phone and tablet master detail application template. And those are really designed to get you started quickly building mobile apps, and you can fully customize them, place your own components onto the form, extend them, etc. Now, inside application settings, which are set in project options, you can also set the application icons. And these are the icons that are shown as splash screens, etc. on iOS and app icons, and the app icons on Android. And those can easily be added to your application visually by going to project options and then selecting either either iOS or Android, and then selecting iPhone, iPad, as well as the launcher icons on Android. Here you can also set the orientations that you want to support, whether or not you want your app to run just in portrait mode or portrait and landscape, etc. Now with Raspberry XE5, we support both native and custom styling across iOS and Android. And as you can see here in the screenshots, those are some examples of some of the styles that we provide. So you see the native iOS style, and you also see the Holo Light, which is the default style that you will find in the IDE, the default Android style. And there's also a companion black style, the Holo Dark theme. So if you like to style your application with a dark theme, you can use the Holo Dark theme. And that style is included in the product and can easily be added via a style book. So again, Holo Light, which is default Android style, and then we also have Holo Dark, which is our custom Android style. Now both of those styles include built-in support for multiple resolutions, and that is from a 1x resolution all the way up to a 3x resolution, so they have really been designed to look great on all Android devices, whether they are a low-resolution device on Gingerbread, for example, or an HD high-resolution device on Jelly Bean or Ice Cream Sandwich. And we also support native Android and iOS controls. And so those are the various show message alerts, the custom picker, which is invoked at runtime on iOS. It is the spinning picker. And on Android, it gives you a pop-up where you can select from your custom list. And that is done via the combo box control. So if you put the T combo box component onto your form, you add your items to the list, and you deploy that application to iOS, you will see a spinning picker where you can select a single item from the list, And on Android, you'll see a pop-up dialog where you can select a single item from the list. We also have the time picker component, which is a new component in XE5 for iOS and Android, and that allows you to invoke the spinning time picker at runtime on both iOS and Android. We also have support for a phone dialer, and we include some snippets and samples that actually show you how to use the phone dialer. Various keyboard types, so those are the different keyboard types that are supported on iOS and Android, including just a standard keyboard type, number pad, etc. So there are a variety of different keyboard types that we support. And then also editing for memo and edit. That's for tmemo and tedit, the standard cut, copy, paste, and zoom support on iOS, cut, copy, paste on Android, and also spell checker support on iOS and Android. Now, when we're developing applications for multiple form factors, layout and layout management is an important part of that. Now, in FireMonkey, you are able to easily lay out your form for different devices by using alignment. So, for example, you can align toolbars to the top or bottom. You can align a web browser component to the client area. You can also work with anchors. And then there's also a form family property that you can use if you're working with different forms for different orientations, for example. A good example would be you have an application where in portrait mode you have less buttons on the form than you have in landscape mode. In that case, you would want to use the form family property in order to show the right form, depending on the orientation. Gestures are, of course, a very important part of building a mobile application, and we support the swipe or pan gesture, tap, pinch and zoom, tap and hold, and double tap. And those are also leveraged heavily in different components. For example, tap and hold is what you use to invoke the selection menu on the tedit or tmemo. Double tap, a lot of times users would use double tap to zoom in on an image and show it at its original size. Pinch and zoom you would apply to an image, and then you can set how far the user is able to zoom in on the image, for example. Media library actions. So if you used XE4, you might already be familiar with those, and those can easily be set. You just put a button onto your form, and then you hook up an action by dropping an action list onto your form, and you can connect your control with an action. The media library actions are very useful in mobile applications. Many mobile applications today leverage access to the built-in camera on your device, and there is a take photo from camera action that you can hook up, and then you basically just assign the image that you've taken back to an image control, such as T-image. You can also access and retrieve images from the camera roll. It also has share sheet functionality built in. So that's the sharing functionality in order to share images via Facebook, Twitter, over-air printing, SMS, etc. Now onto the sensor components. You have support for a location sensor, motion sensor, and the orientation sensor. And the location sensor, as you can see here in this screenshot of a demo, you can get the location of your iOS or Android device using longitude and latitude. You also have support via the geocoder and reverse geocoding to convert that location data to an actual readable address. And that works across Windows, Mac, Android, and iOS. So you can use this, as you can see in this example here, we are actually we're getting the longitude and latitude of our current location, and then we're using reverse geocoding to convert that to a readable address, which is in turn displayed on a map using our web browser component, which is what you see here in this screenshot. The motion sensors component is used to detect motion in your mobile application as you move your device, and that again also works across iOS and Android. You can get different acceleration values, angle acceleration values. You can also determine speed and motion. And that is a component that lives on the tool palette that you can easily add to your mobile application. The same is also for the orientation sensor. This is also a component that you can leverage in your mobile application to get X, Y, Z tilt values and also distance values. And that is used for the gyroscope and compass functionality that you want to add to your application. The camera component allows you to access device camera, activate the flash, for example, get sensor position, etc. And we also have a flashlight sample that ships with the product that shows you how to use that component as well. In RAD Studio XE5, we support local notifications and local notification services, and we have Notification Center, which is a new component that lives on the tool palette, and it supports various notification types on iOS and Android. On iOS, you would see, for example, the badge icon notification that you see on an app icon, or you would see various different banner types depending on what the user has actually set for that particular application on how they want to display notifications in general, and the same also applies for Android. So you can easily use notifications in your mobile apps that you built with Rat Studio on both iOS and Android. T-Time Edit. Now this is a new component that we've added in XE5 and is supported on Windows, Mac, iOS, and Android. It gives you the native pickers on iOS and Android, so you can see here in the bottom left screenshots you get the spinning picker on both iOS and Android, and then you get the same native picker on Windows and Mac. T-List View features in XE5. Now T-List View is our component that we designed for long data-bound scrollable lists, and we've extended that component to include additional functionality. So one of the features that we've added to our list view component is swipe to delete functionality. And that is easily toggled on or off via the can swipe to delete property that is available in the object inspector. You can easily toggle that on and off. We also have multiple display and edit modes for iOS and Android, and we've also extended them in XE5. You have various list accessory types and styles, and those are the arrows, check marks, etc. that you would display on your list. Also various edit mode animations that are shown as you're invoking the edit mode. For example, as you're going from the display mode to the edit mode where the user is interacting with the list, deleting either a single item from the list or multiple items from the list. Of course, the list view is fully live bindings enabled and also includes search filtering. So there's a search filtering property also that you can set right on the list view in the object inspector. You can toggle on and off to have built-in search functionality right within your application. Now also in Rat Studio XE5 we are supporting multiple resolution images. So if you used XE4 in the past, for example on iOS there was a high-res and regular resolution bitmap property. We've extended that now, and there's a multi-res bitmap property that has been added. And this was done to account for all the different resolutions that nowadays are available, on, especially on Android, where you have many different devices with different resolutions. This makes it really easy for you to add images of the correct resolutions and also define what scale that you want to use for those images. So if you have to support certain devices that have different arbitrary resolutions, such as, for example, a 1.3 scale or 1.5 scale, 2.x scale, etc., you can easily set that via the multi-res bitmap and then load the appropriate images for those particular sizes. Now, visual live bindings allows you to visually connect and bind controls to data. This is especially helpful with rapid prototyping. We have a prototype bind source component that lets you work with sample data that you can then hook up to the list view, for example, or the list box to see some sample data at design time that you can work with, and then you can easily switch your data source from a prototype bind source component to your actual, for example, inner-base database and use that at runtime. Now I'm going to show you some demos, and when I'm done with my demos, I'll pass the mic to Marco. So here is the Rat Studio XE5 IDE, and we're looking at one of the samples that ships with the product, and it's called Mobile Controls, and it shows you many of the different controls that FireMonkey offers, and it also shows you the controls that are designed to be used on mobile. So you have here the list box control, for example. You can also use the list view, of course. The list box is really designed for form input dialogues or shorter lists such as settings lists. Support for tabs, which traditionally are at the top on Android, tool buttons, toolbars, etc. Of course, also the editors, memo, edit. And if you go here and select the drop-down menu, you can switch between the different form factors that we support. You can also, of course, select a custom device if you want to develop an application for a different form factor that is not listed as one of the default devices here. I'm going to switch to iPhone 5, and you can see here on the iPhone we have our styled tab control in iOS. That is a standard to have text and tab icons on each tab. You can also see we have the different toolbar buttons, we have the switch controls, editors, etc. And this is a good example of the styling on iOS and Android. So here we have the native iOS style, and then if I switch to my Nexus 7, I have the native Android style. Now, for both iOS and Android, we provide additional styles beyond the ones that you see right here in the IDE. I can easily just place a stylebook onto my form. I can double-click the stylebook, select Load, and I'm going to go to Public Documents, RAT Studio 12.0, Styles, and in this case, I'm going to select the Android folder, apply and close. And then all I have to do is select the form in the structure view here, and on Stylebook, double-click, and I have applied my style to my application. So here you can see an example of that same Android application or same mobile application with a dark style. And for Android, we support both the Holo Light, which is the default style, and the Holo Dark style. So here I have an example of the custom picker, and this is again the combo box component at design time, where I have my various items that I have added via the items editor. And you can see here that we have a list box with 2 items. For the list box item, the first list box item, we have the combo box parented. Alignment is set to AL right. This vertically centers the control. And we also have set a margin of 5, and that means that the actual edit control in this case, or the combo box, or any other control that you have parented within this item, is aligned to the right and will be shown 5 pixels to the left of the outline here, or border of our list box. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to deploy this to my Android device. And here I have our Android Screen View application. This is an application that Jim McKeith, one of the members of our team, wrote, and it allows me to mirror my display. So this is actually what you're seeing here on the screen, my physical device that I have on my desk next to my laptop. Now I'm also going to deploy the same sample to my iOS device, or in this case actually I'm going to target my iOS simulator. And here we have the custom picker, and in this case you see the spinning picker, which is the native picker on iOS, and you see the item that I have selected. Now let's go and have a look at another example. This is the photo editor demo. This is a sample that ships with the product, and it has a lot of different functionality right built into the sample. We have the ability to take a photo from the library via the standard action. This is one of the actions I mentioned during my slides previously, the take photo from library action. Then we have, for this button, we have a take photo from camera action, and then we also have a action for the share sheet. One of the options as well here is when we expand to the action view, you'll see that we have an on before execute, and we are using the image that we've assigned to our image container to share. And the same is also true for the action for taking a photo. There's an on did finish taking, where we actually are assigning the image that we have selected either from the camera that we've taken a picture with, or of course from our actual camera roll, and we're assigning it to our image control on the form. Now I'm going to deploy this to my Android Nexus 7 device that I have here. Select and run. Now I can either load an image that I have in my library, or in this case I'm going to take a photo with my built-in camera. And then of course I can also apply filters to this image, and these are all built-in FireMonkey filters such as pixelate, sharpen, blur, etc. Now I'm going to change the target to the simulator. And of course, in the simulator, you don't have the functionality to take a picture, but you can, of course, load an image from your library. Now, when you're building mobile applications with FireMonkey and the FM framework, it's really easy to change the UI. All you have to do is select a control, such as my tool button here, and then you scroll down to the style lookup property, and you see all the different styles that are available for that particular control. Now, talking about iOS and Android and mobile styles, I also wanted to talk about our upcoming iOS 7 support. iOS 7 support is coming soon for Studio XE5, and our iOS 7 support will consist of both design time support and runtime support. So in the IDE, you will actually be able to switch between iOS 6 and iOS 7, so that at design time you can see the different styling for your user interface between iOS 6 and iOS 7, and also runtime support. So at runtime, if you're running the app on an iOS 6 device, you're automatically going to get the iOS 6 style. And if you're running the same application on an iOS 7 device, you're automatically going to get the iOS 7 style. And our iOS 7 support will be available as a free download for XE5 users when iOS 7 is publicly available. So now I'm going to pass the mic to Marco.
Thanks, Sarina. I'm Marco Cantu, and I'm going to guide you through the next part of the presentation covering local and remote database support in Delphi XE5. The multi-device strategy that we are focusing on, of course, couldn't really work without easy access to database data. In most cases, using the standard client-server techniques is not ideal in the mobile world. So we are down to a couple of different approaches. One is having databases on the device, and of course could be also on your desktop computers. And we do support, as we'll see in more detail, Interbase and SQLite both on iOS and Android, and of course on Windows and Mac. But we also think that it's very relevant to create multi-tier architectures, either using our own technology, that's DataSnap, and piggybacking on the great data access provided by FireDuck, but also using REST and SOAP to connect to remote services written with any other common technology, which could be Java-based, .NET-based, or actually you can even ignore what's the architecture behind the scenes. In terms of local databases, as I mentioned, we support on both iOS and Android SQLite, which is a free, extremely common, but also feature-light database with limited security. We also support Interbase. We have built a local version of Interbase that runs on devices. This comes in two editions. There is an IB Lite edition that's free and feature limited, and there is a commercial edition called Interbase to Go, which is fully featured and has secure encryption. IB Lite, as I was mentioning, is a free version of Interbase you can include in your free apps, but also in your paid applications. Is fast and very powerful in terms of SQL capabilities. And the license is included for free with all editions of Delphi Studio that have mobile support. You can deploy IB Lite for free, or you can scale up without having to recode or change your application in any way, just by deploying a different license. You can support more cores, more simultaneous users, larger files, and again, very specifically have the database on the device encrypted, which is a very significant requirement. There's no change in the code you have to build for moving from Interbase to Go to IB Lite. Even the database files are absolutely identical, as they are identical compared to the desktop or server-side version of Interbase. Notice that, as was already mentioned, you can always hook to database data using live bindings, This makes it very easy, very straightforward to connect to database data. On the device, you can use different sets of database access components, as well as you can use on the client-server architecture or on a multi-tier architecture on the server side, on the data access. Specifically, FireDAC is the new offering since Delphi XE4. It's a universal data access library that is extremely powerful and connects to all enterprise databases, but it also supports Interbase with a new specific driver and SQLite on your devices. Another option is DB Express, which have been around for several years now and is available on iOS and now also on Android. Also keep in mind that there's another way to create small databases local to a device, which is using in-memory tables that could be saved to physical representation on disk, like the FireDAC memory table and the client dataset component. Overall, FireDAC has support for FireMonkey and VCL, has non-visual components, but also some visual helpers, and lets you get to long list of different drivers. We have native high-speed access, as I was mentioned. There's a new Interbase driver, specific Interbase driver. Previously, it was a shared driver with Firebird. So we can actually support some new specific Interbase features. And of course, a very long list of commonly used databases. FireDAC is a part of XE5, is not a separate installation and download anymore. Local database access is available in the professional version, also for desktop, and the full featured version of FireDAC is available in enterprise, but you can purchase it separately as part of the client-server add-on pack for the professional edition of either RADStudio, Delphi, or C++ Builder. So let's have a look to an actual demo of using FireDAC on Android. This is a simple application that uses a few FireDAC components. It has a FireDAC connection, and it uses a table for reading the information from this task, very simple table, and it does use two queries to insert and update new records, although we could have used table operations as well. Let's look at the format of the query. It's actually quite simple. Insert into task name, where the value is task name. So we are going to use it with very simple code asking input to the user for a new task. This is a task list application, and simply set the parameter and execute the query, and then of course refresh the original table. The table is connected to list box in the UI by using visual bindings, and specifically hooking the task name to the text of the visual items. The application uses the SQLite driver, and so we can run this actually on both iOS and Android and see how it behaves. This is application running in an Android screen viewer, so I can add a new task, like remember the milk, and post it to the list. Call home. Of course, once there is a task selected, you can also delete the task and remove it from the database. This remains persistent on the device, so whenever you close the application, even if you close it completely, you're using local data on device, so the data will always be available within the application. Having data on device is certainly very nice and very useful, because it allows you to do significant caching of the data even when the device is not connected, or at least when the connectivity is not good enough to move a lot of data back and forth from the device to the server. But of course, in most scenarios, you want to hook to a database that's not local to the device, but is part of the enterprise company data. One option is accessing remote data that you make available through a DataSnap server. The advantage of DataSnap servers compared to other technologies out there is that you can freely install it on a cloud-hosted environment because you have full control of the deployment and, of course, of the database deployment. But you can also install it on-premise in your own company on your private servers, and it lets you do data transfer through REST and JSON, so using HTTP or a protocol that's always available. And this lets you connect to enterprise data from a mobile device. Again, as we were saying, you can create a DataSnap server that uses FireDAC on the server side to access Oracle and other enterprise-grade databases and surface that data to your mobile devices, as I'll show you in the next demo. Here I have a very simple DataSnap server that's based on HTTP connectivity and uses a custom part. It exposes a single server class, and the server class has, as usual, a couple of sample methods generated by the wizard. And beside that, it exposes a local table, could of course have been a table connecting to a relational database, and exposes it through a provider component. So as you can see, there is little to no code on the server. Once you have built this server, you can execute it and run it and deploy it again wherever you want. There is no limitation. The only thing you need is a Windows server. Then we can create the client application. The client application has also very little code. It uses the code generated at design time, the proxy code. The server methods one client is the proxy class that represents the methods of the server, so we can actually call reverse string on the client. This will not be executed locally, but will send the request to the server and retrieve the result. So in terms of coding, this is very smooth, because very simple, because of the proxy technology that's built into the product. The other thing you can do is you can have inside client data module. The client module has an SQL connection that hooks to the remote application on the server, has a provider that refers to the server class, and a client dataset that refers to the specific table that is exposed by the server. And we can open up this table by hooking at design time to the remote server. The advantage of having the data available at design time is that you can use visual live bindings and pre-populate the client form. If I open the live binding designer, you can see how the list view in this user interface is tied to the entire table, but specifically I'm displaying the company name, and I'm using a header grouping by country. If I want to show something different, let's say the cities we have customers in the various countries, we can just drag a line and we immediately see at design time what will be the effect on the running application. So let me set this back to showing the company names. This is the application, of course, in the IDE running as a preview, but I do have the same application on my mobile device. Again, using this viewer, I can call the reverse method that would just use a server-side operation to change the text to the opposite one, or I can click populate, which simply has one line. Open the client dataset. With one line of code, we are producing this user interface. We can easily scroll around our data and navigate it and get to the details and explore the database table with a very easy to use, very intuitive, mobile-oriented user interface. Finally, I want to spend a few moments talking about cloud services. We've had and we still have support throughout the various platforms, including Android for Azure, tables, blobs, and queues, and similar services on Amazon Web Service. These are directly supported through components, but we think it's plan is a REST client library that we are delivering already as part of XE5. The REST client library has easy-to-use components rather than forcing you to manually manipulate the HTTP client request using one of the available Delphi HTTP client components like the Indie HTTP component. You can abstract and work in terms of a REST client, REST request, and REST response objects. These components hook together, and they are available for all platforms, including VCL, FireMonkey on desktop, and FireMonkey on mobile. We also ship a debugger that you can use that uses the same component, but you can use it to prepare your queries, to test your queries, to execute them, and figure out the proper configuration. And when you are done, you can simply take the parameters of you have set up in the REST debugger and move them to your REST components. More in general, it has a comprehensive HTTP client with including asynchronous execution. It has support for several authentication models, and it has support for JSON, parsing, and formatting. And again, integration with live bindings and the ability to execute the queries and have a preview of the output directly at design time. It has support for JSON, although you can technically use it with XML, but the native support comes from JSON object mapping and the ability to adapt a JSON data structure to a data set whenever this is reasonable. This is a very simple demo. The scenario is calling this API about music. This is the basic URL. Among the parameters, you have the actual resource, the actual path. The path can include parameters. Parameters are extracted from the path, but you can also have get and post parameters with some preview, with some initial values that you put inside the parameter with this simple editor. Once you have the proper settings, you can actually send the request to the server, get back a result. You can see the headers. You can see the JSON data structure that is returned. And when available, you can see tabular data. Now, by default, it will pick the main JSON object, which is not particularly relevant in this case. But what we can do, we can take this same configuration and put those values inside our component. So here we have a REST client component that will hook to the same API. We have a REST request with the resource URL and the parameters list with default values. Once this is set up, what we can do is actually try out the request at design time. But before I do that, I wanted to show you how I'm actually using a REST response data adapter, which reads from the REST response and populates a data set. The REST response is configured not to look to the root element of the JSON, but to look to the results sub-object, so it can actually extract information from that JSON data structure. So again, if we just go get here design time, execute the request, we get our JSON data returned in the response object. We get the response adapter that will populate the client data set, and then through live binding, we can actually get to see the data at design time immediately into our development environment. So without even having to run this application, we already have a preview of the final output the user will get. So again, a powerful and complete library to manage REST calls to remote servers using JSON. This will let you easily call into Java servers, PHP servers, ASP.NET servers that are based on REST and JSON structures. So that's all for me now. Let me get it back to JT for the final part of the session. JT?
Thank you, Marco. So I'd like to close this session with a discussion of the pricing and availability of the product. So RAD Studio XE5, as many of you know, is comprised of both Delphi XE5, C++ Builder XE5, HTML5 Builder, and Interbase XE3. We spent a lot of time talking about what's new in RAD Studio with regards to Delphi in particular. So I want to spend a minute to let you C++ Builder developers know that there's a lot of new features for you as well. We've added support for some of the new controls in Windows and OS 10, performance optimizations across the board, FireDAC support, the same as we have in the Delphi XE5 as well. And also we've included the REST client library support into C++ Builder for Windows and Mac OS 10. Take a look at the roadmap. We are planning to deliver C++ support for iOS and Android later this year. So soon, C++ Builder developers, you'll be able to also target Android and iOS for your FireMonkey applications. The Delphi product editions and prices are pretty much the same as they were in XE4. At the professional level, we do offer an add-on pack for both mobile. Mobile add-on pack does include Android and iOS, and there's a $2.99 upgrade option for you. We also provide the FireDAC client-server add-on pack, which allows you to access the client-server database feature support available in FireDAC. Same for C++ Builder. Although there is no mobile add-on pack, you do have the FireDAC CS add-on pack. And as I mentioned in the previous slide, the mobile add-on pack will be available later this year. And RAD Studio editions and prices, again, include the add-on pack for mobile in all editions, as well as FireDAC in all editions across the board. So the FireDAC client-server add-on pack more specifically gives you the ability and license to add connectivity to remote databases using FireDAC from the Professional Edition. So this is targeted at professional editions of RAD Studio, Delphi, and C++ Builder. It is $4.99 for a new user and $2.99 upgrade from earlier versions. The mobile add-on pack includes Android and iOS. And so this is an add-on for Delphi XE5 Professional. You do need to have a previously installed and registered version of Professional in order to buy and register the mobile add-on pack. So you must have Professional Edition, otherwise the mobile add-on pack will not register or be usable. So there is a $4.99 new user license cost for the add-on pack, plus a $2.99 upgrade option. The product is available for trial now, so you can go to the Embarcadero site and download the trial. We'll have instant trials available soon for Delphi and C++ Builder. And we also have done some additional integration of Mac and Cloud So for those of you who want to try iOS development or Mac OS 10 development who don't physically own a Mac, Mac and Cloud is offering a special trial period for you, and we do have a lot of automatic integration in place for you to get up and running very quickly. So the setup for Mac and Cloud is very simple. You basically click Get Started Now. It registers your EDN account to a Mac and Cloud account, and it sets up a remote desktop connection and a remote connection profile within the product to connect those things together for you. So it's a really quick and easy way to get up and running if you don't have a Mac today, so that you can try out the iOS and Mac OS support. So thank you for attending the webinar today. This was the announcement of Rad Studio XE5. We're all very excited and pleased to have shared this with you today, and we'd like to open it up to Q&A at this point.
Okie dokie. We've been trying to handle a bunch of the questions. There's more of you out there, hundreds and hundreds posting questions. We've been trying to keep up, but we'll go back through them as well, as many as we can. So keep putting them in, and if not, we'll answer some of them after the fact and figure out how to get all the answers to everybody. Let's see. Oh boy, where to start? Let's.
I know. There's a lot of questions. I saw a question here, David, that I
go ahead,
can
JT.
take, which is questions about what ARM cores are supported.
Yep.
And we are specifically supporting ARM v7 core. And the good news is that's 90+% of the market devices that are out there today are on ARM v7. So that's what the support is today, and likely will continue to be. We are always evaluating what platforms, which hardware profiles to support in the future as well.
Yeah, JT, one of the questions, or Serena, talked about iOS 7. People asking about iOS 7. I know Apple announced that would be available, I think, September 18th at the earliest.
Yes, I had actually a slide in my presentation on iOS 7 towards the end of my presentation, and I talked about iOS 7 support. We will be supporting iOS 7. There will be style support available once Apple publicly releases iOS 7. That will consist of being able to toggle between iOS 6 and iOS 7 right inside the IDE. This will be a free download for XE5 users. And then when you deploy your application to an iOS 7 device, you would get the iOS 7 UI. If you deploy it to an iOS 6 device, you would get the iOS 6 UI.
Yeah, there were several different questions about what about future platforms for FM?
Yep, and the generic answer is, we're always evaluating what platforms you need to support your user requirements and the market demand that you may have. Obviously, Android is a really important platform for many of you, especially probably many of you on the phone are from the European, Middle East, and or India area, and Android is very, very popular. So this was definitely a critical and high priority target for us. Going forward, we will continuously evaluate. We will have, you certainly can give us your vote by reaching out to us directly, anybody on my product management team or evangelist, they'll get that feedback back to us. And we will be running regular surveys also to gauge that demand. So, just keep telling us what you need, and we will communicate via roadmaps what our future plans are when we can.
There were a couple of people asking questions about how to handle different form factors, different device coordinate systems or sizes. What about the different orientations, phones versus tablets? Tarina, some guidance?
Yeah, so there are many different approaches. There are a couple key ones. Form family is one of them, where you can assign a specific form for an orientation. Of course, you could work with two different forms if you wanted to have an entirely different layout or a substantially different layout for, let's say, portrait versus landscape, and you could use the on-form resize event to detect the current form size and then show either the portrait or landscape form for that. Anchors are also a good way. When you're laying out your user interface, you can anchor them to certain locations on the form, like top left, top right. And the same can also be said for alignment. So if you're working with alignment, for example, you have an application that has a toolbar at the top with several tool buttons, which traditionally would be speed buttons. you can align them to the top right or top left, and that ensures that they're vertically centered. And the reason that is important is when you're building an application for Android, you're probably also planning on submitting that same application to the iOS App Store. And you want to make sure that the application looks nice across both iOS and Android. And if you're using the alignment property, for example, align right, align left, you can set a margin right, left as well. And you can ensure that the controls are vertically centered, which accounts for the different heights. So, for example, on iOS, a control height is different than on Android for things like speed buttons, etc., whether it's a share button, a playback button, a trash button, etc. And that accounts for those different heights of those different controls. So they're automatically vertically centered, so UI looks nice across both iOS and Android if you're using alignments.
And then, Serena, I think you answered this one along the way. People were asking about styles, colors for fonts, other kinds of property settings. I know that that we ship several different styles, and people can have a custom style. I think somebody was asking more, could they use a common style across all different platforms versus the default styles that you get automatically?
So for iOS, when you're building your mobile application, you get the default iOS style. We also ship a black and transparent version. For Android, when you're building your application, you'll see this if you've purchased Rad Studio XE5 or downloaded the trial. By default, you get the HoloLight style. And this is the Google standard Android style. It's called HoloLight. And there's also a dark version called HoloDark that we make available that you can apply to your application via a style book. And that style is available and ships with the product. Also, there's the Bitmap Style Designer that is accessible via the Tools menu in the product. And the Bitmap Style Designer allows you to fully customize your styles. You can also create styles that you would be able to use across all the different platforms that you're working on. We also have in the past also released some premium styles that, we're always working on additional premium styles for the future as well for all the platforms. But to get back to your question, you can easily customize the styles. You can also create your own styles. One of the properties that I wanted to make users aware of, it's called Style Settings, and that property is available for almost every single control environment. And what that means is if you expand the Style Settings menu, you will see various different options. And one of them is, and I'm going to have a look here right now on my machine, one of them is family, size, style, font, color, and other. And what the Style Settings property does is it allows you to turn off certain settings that are automatically applied via the style to your control. So if you have a speed button on your form, for example, or on a toolbar, you can change the look of that button via the Style Lookup property. But if you wanted to change a setting, for example, you wanted to change the default font color that we set for you that's platform specific, font size, overall style, etc., you can just turn off the Style Settings property. And then you could go and scroll up in Object Inspector, go to the font property, and you could manually change the font color, etc. And then it will use whatever setting you have used instead of the style provided one.
Okay. Some people were asking about databases on the mobile devices, and I think Marco covered that as well with SQLite and IBLite. IBLite is free to deploy. We also have Interbase to Go, which has multiple transaction support, encryption support at the database table and column level. That has a pricing for users, and there's OEM pricing if you contact our customers. IBLite has all the ANSI SQL 92 data types, and you can have one transaction active at a time.
Yeah, and what's really great about IBLite, it's a free version of Interbase for mobile. So in XE4, we supported it for iOS, and now with XE5, with our Android release, we're also supporting it on Android. What's really great about it is if you're using Interbase, for example, in your desktop applications, you can use your same database files on mobile as well using IBLite.
Yeah, there's several different questions along the way about can you call into APIs on the different mobile devices, and can you link libraries, static libraries, and so on. And of course, we've wrapped some of the APIs in classes and in runtime library methods. We've wrapped some in components, but you ultimately have all the access to whatever is an API on iOS or Android through either directly or through the Objective-C bridge or the Java bridge on Android. We have blog articles and information about how to do that. I think it's the device info example is probably a really good mobile snippet example. That ships with the product in the mobile sample subdirectory. Look for device info. It has ifdef for iOS that shows how to use the Objective-C bridge to get the platform information. And it also has an ifdef for Android in the same source code to see how to get and convert a Java string, for example, into a Unicode string and get to the lower level APIs via Java bridge.
Yeah, that gets us to another really good point, and something I wanted to mention during this webinar is all of our samples and snippets. We have a lot of different code snippets available, and those are designed to show you how to use key functionality in the product with just a couple lines of code. They ship with the product. They're in the public documents, RAD-Studio 12.0 directory. I would also recommend checking out our SourceForge location and SourceForge directory. If you go to SourceForge online and you search for RAD-Studio, you can access all the latest snippets and samples there as well. We always are continuing to update them, add additional ones, etc. But it's a really good starting point. If you look at the snippets, there are snippets for our sensors and services, device info, for example, how to use the native pickers. We also have some samples like the photo editor demo that I showed today that shows you how to use, how to access the native device camera on iOS and Android, how to load an image from the library, how to apply effects, and then how to share that image. So those are all really good examples to help you get started that I would highly recommend looking at.
And again,
additionally, of course, yeah, I was going to say if you when you buy the product, we deliver source files for our implementation as well, and that's a great place to look for specific examples of how we hooked into, iOS services or Android NDK or even Dalvik services as needed.
Yeah, just to note, the Starter Edition and the Trial Edition do not include the RTL and the FireMonkey and VCL source code.
Correct. David, I see some questions about debugging, and I just want to make sure everyone is aware that debugging is fully supported. Basically, the way it works is you do a debug build. The application is deployed through PA server to the device or the simulator, and a GDB connection is made so that we can remotely debug your application. And debugging works just like if you've used Delphi, just like you're setting breakpoints, inspecting memory, all the kinds of things you would expect from a debugger, but using GDB as the debug engine.
Okay, great. And several people asked, is this video replay going to be available? It'll show up in the next week or so. What we're doing is recording all the Q&A sections for all three, and I'll slap those on the end of the whole presentation, so you'll have all this conversation and answers to questions, and I'll figure out how to do something with the log file as well. Some people again are asking about how to get to specific devices and or interfaces that we may or may not have wrapped. Again, we have articles, videos from Code Rage Mobile, for example, showing how to call into APIs, do things like iAd for advertisements and in-app purchases. There was another little code snippet on finding out whether you're connected to the network, whether the network is going up or down on the Wi-Fi, for example. Of course, with client dataset, you can save locally. It can run in briefcase mode, so you can be connected to your remote DataSnap servers and databases, and then disconnect. Everything gets cached to memory. You can have client dataset call save to file both for XML or for a binary format, and then load that back up again. That way you can continue doing edits and so on locally, and then do the apply updates to send the changes back to the database. So there's all sorts of options for when you live in a connected, disconnected world, both on your desktop as well as, of course, on your mobile device. Let's see.
I saw actually a couple questions about how to use the hardware back key on the Android device, and there are a couple of really good examples that you can look at. Earlier in the presentation, I mentioned the mobile application wizard. So if you do file new mobile application in RAD-Studio or Delphi XE5, and you select either of the master detail templates or the header footer with navigation or tab with navigation templates, So those are all examples where we have two tabs and we navigate from the second tab back to the first. You can see some good example code, and in this case, basically, we just create an on-form key up event, and then we are assigning the hardware back key, and then we can assign some actions. For example, we can assign to set the active tab, etc. So it's a really good example of how to use the hardware back key in your application. And in that case, if you look at the sample or in the templates, you will also see that we have some if-defs for Android where we're actually hiding the toolbar back button, that is the traditional back button that you see on iOS, that we're actually hiding them if you're on Android. Now, of course, there are some applications on Android where you would see a back button at the top where the person who's created the application has created a more common-looking application between iOS and Android, but a more standard way on Android would definitely be to use the back button instead of an actual visible toolbar button.
I also see some questions about Mac and Cloud. In particular, how long is the trial period? So the free trial that Mac and Cloud is offering to Rad Studio developers is a 24-hour trial over 30 days. So this means that within those 30 days, you have up to 24 hours to connect into a Mac and Cloud session and do what you need with it. Just make sure that you log out of your session when you're done so that you're not wasting any time out of that trial. But it's 24 hours over the 30-day trial period.
There's always a question about documentation, how we're improving that, how doing more, and so on. I always say it real simply. Our doc team is updating the doc wiki in real time all the time. The help file is generated from the doc wiki periodically, and help update files are generated. So ultimately, if you want to look for something, always go to docwiki.embarcadero.com and use that as your primary source. And again, the doc team periodically, monthly or whatever, at periods of time, generates the updated help files from the doc wiki, but everything is being updated in real time in the doc wiki repository. So
we have some great mobile tutorials as well on the doc wiki, as David mentioned. If you go to docwiki.embarcadero.com, there are entire getting started tutorials that show a lot of the functionality that we showed today.
And there's also, when you go to the doc wiki page for those mobile tutorials, there's a link at the top to a PDF where all of the tutorials are combined into an ebook. So you can take that PDF and print it, put it on your device reader or whatever, and it's a great ebook. There's also other people working on books coming out. There was a Japanese book. JT, I think you were in Japan, Tokyo, maybe earlier this year. Where there was a FireMonkey iOS book on the day of the launch in Japanese.
Yep, absolutely. So yeah, we're seeing definitely a lot more blog activity and printing books and those kinds of things. Certainly in various geographies as well, but quite a bit of interest in getting more information out there.
The other thing I should mention, since we have people still on board, is we have Code Rage coming up in mid-October. So Code Rage 8 will cover a lot of mobile and Android and iOS. We had Code Rage Mobile in June for iOS, where we had about 18 or 19 sessions. Those are all up on replay. But Code Rage Mobile is, I think it's the 15th, 16th, and 17th of October, that Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So look forward to that. Mark your calendar. We're putting all the sessions together and the presenters for that. And so that will have a lot, I think over 30 sessions, all focused on Delphi and doing multi-device development, doing Android, iOS development, how to work with the APIs, how to do things with all sorts of different devices, connected to devices and sensors. So stay tuned for that. As well as other webinars to come throughout between now and the end of the year, as well as other tour stops. If you're near one of the tour stops, you can just go to the embarcadero.com/world-tour website, and there's cities being added, and there'll be more cities added in October to December. We're also popping up at meetups and other mobile conferences around the world in addition.
I did see a couple questions about XE5. XE5 is available, was announced yesterday. and it's available for purchase, and you can also download a trial. There were a couple questions on that, so I just wanted to make sure that everyone was aware of that.
And the ISO file is on registered user downloads. A couple people said, what about the ISO versus the sort of little setup executable that pulls everything else down? You could go there. I know we covered a lot. There were still questions people wanted to know about Bluetooth and about barcode scanning and QBR codes and so on. We have blogs that talk about how you can get to the different APIs. There was someone, I forget who it was, someone I think down in South America did a blog post. I'll find it and you can search for it, that showed how to do iOS and barcode, and the same mechanism works. Somebody asked about using a specific, I think it was Primosh asked, can you use native libs like Zinx as barcode scanning? If it's a static library, it's possible we can link it. Depends on how it was built and what functions it exports. But we use we link static libraries like interface. Go ahead, JT. Sorry.
Yep. I was going to say it just needs to expose functions in C-style interfaces is the best bet.
Yeah. I just don't know about Zinc, so I'll take a look at it though, pretty much. We link statically link Interbase or IB Lite and Interbase to Go. We statically link a .a file into your application on iOS and Android. I think one of the things to note about Interbase Lite or IB Lite in XE5, it's now just IB Lite for mobile. So the same key that you get as part of a paid registered customer works for both iOS and Android, whereas in XE4 there was a specific key for iOS with IB Lite. Now it's an IB Lite for mobile, and it's the same key for deploying applications on iOS and Android, right?
That is correct. And when you're building an application and you have a database file in your application, there are just two things to keep in mind. In the deployment manager, of course, you can set the featured files, and there you basically are setting the files that you need to deploy to your mobile device. On iOS, you are deploying any file, whether it's a music file, like an MP3, a video file, or a database file to start up documents. That's the remote path. And then on Android, it's assets internal. And if you're looking at some of the snippets, like our IB Lite snippet or our audio playback snippet, those are really good examples of that.
What else? A lot of these are repeat questions. Anything else that pops out, JT or Serena?
Guys, a few questions about the Android device viewer. That was something that we built internally so that we could demonstrate the product. It's a FireMonkey application that basically uses the ADB protocol to screen scrape bitmaps off the device. I think it's a few frames per second, but it's good enough for being able to show the device on a big projector while we're running on the device. So many people are asking if we can make it available, David, and I think we could probably figure out how to make that happen.
Yeah, I'll send Jim. I'll ask Jim.
I sent Jim an email already saying people want your app.
Yeah, remember it goes through the screen grab part of ADB, so it has some delay depending on how complex the bits are on the Android screen that you're grabbing. So if it's a very simple screen on your Android device, it's sort of sub 1 second delay. It can get longer if you have a lot of bits on the screen. Jim also talked about, I think in one of his blogs, there's a VNC app. It's about $8 in Google Play that you put on your Android device, and that gives you real-time update refreshing, and you don't have to rootkit your Android device. So,
but it's a nice example of FireMonkey, and we'll work with him. Jim has a blog at blogs.embarcadero.com, and we'll work with him on making that available.
Well, and one other thing we should address, I've seen this come up a few times, questions about the emulator, and in particular running in a virtual machine like VMware. Generally, my recommendation would be to get a device. The emulator can have poor performance, particularly when you're running within a virtual machine, and that's because the GPU support is not really very, very well completed. So if you can, and it's highly recommended, use a device. I think you'll be much more satisfied with the Android development experience in that regard.
I'm just typing something into another question, but let's see. People asking about Windows Phone. That's on a roadmap in the WinRT/ARM future direction that we're taking a look at. So nothing currently in XE5, but it's on the roadmap. Here's a question more about DataSnap. DataSnap has full support for user session management. You can have server-side invocation or session, which is where the client is connected. There's three different, look at the life cycle property on your server class, and you can have multiple server classes in a DataSnap server, and they can have different life cycles for each of those server classes. I haven't, have either of you done anything with drag? There's no drag and drop on a mobile device as far as I know. I mean, there's gestures for doing things.
Yeah, and we have support for various gestures: tap, tap and hold, double tap, swipe, zoom, pinch and zoom, rotate.
Yeah, the interactive gestures. There's no dialog boxes. There's no menus on these mobile devices. That's for Windows and Mac for menus. But you can create your own, in a sense, menus by a toolbar, maybe with horizontal scroll and a whole bunch of speed buttons, where you could do a gesture kind of through to swipe through them to find the one that you want to click. People do that sometimes.
And we also have some interactive gesture snippets that are also available.
Yep. Again, we support REST and SOAP for web services, so you can still import WSDL into your mobile client. You can make REST calls. You can also use the Project Indie components. Marco has his Delphi Feeds example where he uses the HTTP component and gets an RSS feed. He uses the XML document component to parse the XML that comes back. And then we have our REST services components for doing authentication and connectivity to all sorts of cloud REST-based services that return back JSON packets that we then parse. You can pass objects from TObject on. Lots of control there. You can bring the data into a data set and then do all sorts of things with it, do live bindings to user interface elements, list views, list boxes, grids, and so on.
And I've seen a couple questions on supported Android platforms, and we support Android Gingerbread 2.3 through 2.7, Ice Cream Sandwich 4.03 and 4.04, and Jelly Bean 4.1.x, 4.2.x, and 4.3.x.
Somebody asked about Java layouts. We have T-layout in general. You can put a T-layout down and then align it to the top or the right or the bottom or wherever. And then we have T-flow layout and T-grid layout as components that you can use. So who was that? Oh, that was Regis was asking about different layouts. So those are the three, but you can also create your own custom layouts, and I suspect we might think about adding other layouts in the future. I forget from my Java world. Grid bag, I think, was grid bag layout was a Java layout. There were all sorts of other ones. And you can do audio play and audio recording. You can play video.
Yes.
The different formats are supported on different devices, and you can capture bitmaps from a video camera source. And we have example snippets in the mobile snippets, examples for all of that, or in the FireMonkey mobile samples subdirectory.
Yes. So
and
we
also
have
in SourceForge. Go ahead.
Two key categories: the mobile snippets, which are really designed to be short. Examples to get you started with certain features, and then we also have the FireMonkey mobile folder, which has more complete samples, or bigger samples, I should say, that show combined functionality that is available in FireMonkey.
Some people were asking about what about other audio and video formats supporting streaming formats and so on. Right now, we load a file, or we can record a file or play a file. But I suspect somebody will create a streaming audio or streaming video component where you could support those protocols. Or somebody might just do an example and upload it somewhere. Or I forget who asked it, but because it disappeared from my screen, you create one and share the example with everybody. Oh, type of optimizations, FireMonkey, iOS. Joe, the best way is to look, if you go to llvm.org and search for optimizations. I forget, JT, do you remember the URL? I'll have to look it up and post it somewhere. There's a whole, there's just a list of lots of optimizations that are available as part of the LLVM optimization flow. And you can turn on all of them, none of them, but just search llvm.org and search optimizations. Joe,
we do also expose many of those options within the IDE as well.
In the project options.
Yep.
And usual thing holds if you're doing rapid prototyping, turn off optimization so you can get faster builds, and then when you start doing your release builds, and you can turn everything on, and the compilers will slow down because they're then doing multiple optimizations sort of in the middle of the tool chain before the code emitting happens. People were asking about what about Java bytecode and other things. We're doing native code in Delphi and C++. It's direct to the NDK, direct to the iOS native APIs. In some cases, I think JT, you probably know more about this later in the later information. Android has continued to expand the reach of the native SDK or the NDK. There's some things where it's still or only available in Java for now, but go ahead, JT.
Right. Absolutely. No, we've seen Google put a lot of effort into this and talk about it more. When it was originally developed for game developers because of performance reasons, it was pretty thin, but since then it's improved quite a bit in terms of functionality. Which means occasionally we do, for certain services, we do call into Dalvik and we use JNI, which is basically a way to marshal a call into the Java runtime and get some information back from it. Since somebody asked about what JNI is, but that's pretty minimal overall.
Yep. Okay. Well, there's just so many and a lot of good thank yous and other things. Unicode support Regis, everything in Delphi, all strings are Unicode strings. And then we have helper functions like toString and so on, that if you have a different type, it'll convert it to Unicode string. When you go through the Objective-C bridge or the Java bridge on Android, Objective-C on iOS, we have samples again. Look at the device info example to see how you convert. I think there's a Java string to string method that will convert a Java string if it's coming through the JNI bridge into a Unicode string, and also an NS string, which is an Objective-C string class, into a Unicode string. So we have Unicode support both in the database layers as well as in the language of Delphi. And then in C++ Builder, we have Unicode support as well. And then when we have the mobile versions, you'll have Unicode all throughout all of that. So we've had Unicode since the 2009 releases of our products. JT, maybe this is on the roadmap, I'm not sure. 64-bit ARM processors in our future?
Well, I think Apple has made it clear that this is their future, so
Yep.
I think it's something we definitely are going to pay attention to.
Yeah. Let's see. I need to display tabular data from query. Can I use string grid? You can use string grid if you want, or TMS has their grid, and wall-to-wall has their grid coming out as well for XE5. So
you can, of course, also use the list view as well.
And use the list view and list box if you want. But yeah, there's grid, T-grid, and T-string grid come with FireMonkey. And then again, you can use list box or list view if you have lots of rows of data that you want to display, and